I think people are still coming.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bianca Mannini, Senior Policy Officer at BIR, the Bureau of International Recycling. And on behalf of BIR and our co-organizer, UNCTAD, thank you for joining us for this side event. As you know, one of the key items on the agenda for this 15th meeting of the open-ended working group is the transboundary movement of used textiles and textile waste. And this item originates from a proposal submitted by the European Union and Chile at COP17 last year. This proposal called for intersessional work to gather evidence on the trade in used textiles and textile waste, assess the challenges related to it, and consider which options might be available within the framework of the Basel Convention to address them. And the options are broad in scope. They range from developing new technical guidelines to potentially introducing trade control mechanisms, including prior informed consent procedures. And before any of these options can be assessed, we believe it's essential to understand the materials they seek to regulate, understand how they circulate, and what happens to them at each stage of their journey, to avoid producing eventually policy responses with potentially serious unintended consequences. And the scale of what is at stake is substantial. Used textiles circulate through a global and interconnected value chain with different regions specializing in different processes. As you will hear from our panelists and presenters, different regions specialize in collecting, sorting, trading, and therefore the livelihoods of millions of people are affected by the flows of these materials across importing and exporting countries. So it is for this reason that BIR and UNCTAD considered it important to organize this side event to bring evidence directly into this policy process. Specifically, we will bring forward evidence on the flows of used textiles, the waste fractions, how these materials move, and how the reuse and recycling system operates in general. Our objective is to ensure that the decisions taken within this framework are grounded in clear data. So to that end, you will hear from Dr. Chantaline Carpentier, Head of Trade, Environment, Climate and Sustainable Development at UNCTAD, presenting findings from the latest SMEP program study on second-hand clothing markets in Uganda and Tanzania. You will then hear from Mattias Gustafsson, Senior Researcher at IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute, presenting a study on how different Basel Convention approaches to used textiles could affect Kenya's mitumba market. And we will then move to a panel discussion where our speakers will be joined by practitioners with direct operational experience across the value chain, across different regions. So you will hear from Marvin Owusu, Executive Officer of the Ghana Used Clothing Dealers Association. You will hear from Sheikh Muhammad Iqbal, joining us online, former CEO of the Pakistan Textile Council, and Jessica Franken, Vice President for Government and External Affairs at the Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles Association in the United States. Teresia Wairimu, Chairperson of the Mitumba Consortium Association of Kenya, will also join us to deliver some closing remarks. So we hope you leave this room with a clear, evidence-grounded picture of how trade in used textiles look like and what potential avenues for addressing the issue of textile waste are. Without further ado, let's dive into the data and The floor is yours, Chantaline.
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I'd like to warmly acknowledge the delegates and partners that are here, as well as the practitioners and our partner, BRI. UN Trade and Development is here because this discussion sits at the meeting point between waste, trade, and development. And used clothing is part of the daily life for millions of people, as everybody working in this field knows, and it supports affordability, livelihood, and reuse. At the same time, it raises legitimate questions about residual waste, responsibility, and environmentally sound management. So allow me to start with a question on the screen, if you could go to the next slide, or I'm supposed to do it. Yeah. Power. Okay. So this is the question on the screen. So when does used clothing become textile waste? Because that's the overarching question for this whole presentation. It sounds like a question for custom officers and lawyers, environmental economists, but the answer decides what people pay for clothes, whether a trader in Kampala still has a livelihood next week, and who is left managing the waste at the end and where. This is why UN Trade and Development is here. A process that waste governance should not have to answer a trade question without trade evidence, and that evidence that we have brought it comes from one of our trade and environment program called SMEP, the Sustainable Manufacturing Environmental Pollution Program, and it's funded by the United Kingdom in partnership with UNEP. Is there with? Yeah, sorry. And the story come above all from in the field work that we've done, sorting 244 and 500 piece of garment by hand in East Africa market. So basically, what's the issue here? The challenge in plain terms is that in the trade world, you have the less graph here. So on the trade world, what we see is when this secondhand clothing comes to the border, to the custom, it's under HS code 6309. And basically, it's called worn clothing for reuse. Under the Basel Convention, where we are here, some of the same clothes can be waste under the code B3030. And so worn clothing appear in both the HS code that I just mentioned and B3030 list. A trade code shows our bale was classified at the border. It does not determine whether all items inside are reusable or whether some fraction should be managed as waste. That distinction depends on the sorting, specification, contamination, recoverable value, realistic reuse or recycling pathway, and applicable waste rules. The question now is where that classification threshold should sit, including for synthetic fiber garment with no realistic reuse or recycling pathways. That threshold matters because it affects the reuse market, custom practice, and how countries manage residual waste. So basically, in 2023, Africa imported the equivalent of about 45,000 fully loaded 28-ton containers of used clothing. Uganda and the United Republic of Tanzania alone accounted for 6,000, roughly 13% of all containers entering the continents. At that scale, classification is not a technical detail. The way countries distinguish reuse from waste affect how this trade is recorded, regulated, and managed. The central question is therefore practical. This is not about a small number of disputed shipments, but about the rules applied to a continuous, high-level, high-volume trade system. This is the volume that this single distinction governs. But I am not here to tell you where to draw that distinction line. I am here because that distinction line is as much a trade and development line as it is an environmental one, and the two worlds need to meet, and it deserves evidence from both sides. So let us get a bit more onto data. But before, let's look at what most of what becomes waste begin upstream, in how much clothing the world makes and how it's in design. So that clothing comes from somewhere. And we take the example of the United States here, because this is the source data, the source of the clothing for our study. And in 1960, the average American bought 25 garments a year. Today, it's 68. It's almost 3 times more than in the 60s. And most of what is discarded there never reaches reuse at all. The United States throw away around 67 million tons of textile a year, and 2/3 go straight to landfill. So this is a shared problem across the whole world and across supply chain. Design of a production, trade, reuse, and water, waste, whatever it's left at the end. Some of it, microplastic, for instance, is best dealt with where it starts by producers, not at the border. Different instrument will be best to address different problem, as you can see. And we are not good at the bottom, of that ladder. Even in the United States, which is very advanced system, only about 50% of discarded textile are recovered. The rest is burned or buried. The most value, environmental and economic, sits at the top, checking everybody's awake. Reuse, repair, resale. The least, of course, value is at disposal. So rules that strengthen reuse first, before forcing disposal heavy requirement onto the system, cannot yet carry them. The requirement onto the system that cannot yet carry them, that is how to dispose of these tons of waste, tend to do better on both count. Second-hand clothing already sit at the top of that ladder, and it is worth remembering that before we redesign regulation, we need to look at these evidence. So to get the evidence, what we did, we basically look at 2,444, 5,000 garment, as I mentioned about before. Around 96% of the clothing was rewearable. That means a little over 1% was actual waste. And if you look at the bale breakdown grade, 83% was grade A. That means that this is high quality, often nearly new. This is the type of clothes I go and buy in secondhand shop here in Geneva or Paris or elsewhere. Really not in Geneva because it's too expensive, but everywhere else. 15% is B and only 2% was classified as C. And the rest, just 4% could not be reworn. And of that 4%, 3% was actually being reused for rags. And only 1% is genuine textile waste that went to the waste. In one item, this is one item in 100. That alone unsettles the idea that trade is mostly dumping, right, on the secondhand clothing. So, oh, I had not moved my slide. I'm sorry about that. Let me go back so you can see that while I'm talking. But there's the real finding that we found in these studies is that the number moves with sorting. Globally, after sorting, the residual unsellable share of credentialed clothing is estimated at between 1 and 12%. Clearly, our study in Tanzania and in Ghana show that we are basically at the lower end of this, at the 1%. The same trade, therefore, behave completely differently depending on whether it has been sorted. And whether what we find in the paper that we don't talk about here tonight is the relationship that the importers, and in this case, we had 2,147 traders, and that bought bales from 53 importers. And so that relationship between those, because if you are the importer, you want to make sure that bale is high value because you're going to be the one stick with it, regardless of what you paid for it. So the gap, therefore, is the assumption that we make in either direction, whether we say this is waste at the start or whether this is actually reusable clothes, depend on the quality, and we need to look at the evidence for these things. And this is the graph that I should have showed you that goes with this. Now, let me bring this down to a single household. What does that mean for that person in Tanzania, for instances? So, or in this case, Uganda. Sorry, we're using Uganda example. So about half of Ugandan daily income is around $2.70. At that income, a new shirt that costs $6.36 is about 2.5 days of work. The same shirt secondhand, which is $2.69, is about 1.5 days of work. This is not charity, and it is not a small thing. It is for many families the difference between being properly clothed and not being discriminated and or not. And it is a livelihood, not just a purchase. 70% of these secondhand businesses in Kampala are the main earner in their household. 98% in Dar es Salaam, our traders said the trade brought real financial benefit to their families. When we weigh new rules, that is the cost we are weighing, and it falls hardest on the people with the least. Now, in terms of the part that we should say to ourselves before anyone else criticizes the study is that, of course, there is reuse delay at the end. The reuse is only delaying that at some point these will be ended up in the waste. It doesn't remove that problem. Every garment becomes waste eventually, and even 1% adds up. And this is an example. So at the observed 1.1 to 1.2% of these bale being waste, this range from 168 million kilogram entering these two market. That means 1.1% is 1,800 to 2,200 ton of textile waste. And right now that burden lands where the capacity to manage is the weakest. That is fair, the real fairness question in this room. This is why the answer cannot be border control alone. It must include who manages what is left, who pays for it, and whose responsibility is upstream, where the volume is created for this consumption in the first place. And I want to correct one perception our fieldwork corrected. The evidence does not support a blanket picture of these markets as waste dumping. If that is not clear yet, I'm going to repeat it again. In the market of Kampala and Dar es Salaam, traders sort clothing into grade with their own names. First, second, Fajia, Ronia. And they judge each garment 5 ways before it sells. How it looks, its condition, whether it is in fashion, whether it will still work, and how long it will last. That is quality control done every day by people who know their market. These are specialists. It is also a social ladder of opportunity. 57% of the retail owner we met had progressed from a lower position in the trade, from carrying bale to vending to retailing. And women own a third of these businesses. And the trade is already governed by the country that receives it. In East Africa, the East Africa standard sets quality checks before clothing can be imported. And 90% of importers told us that quality improved once they could talk directly to their sorters. And yes, the same material can still be treated as reused by the country that sends it, and waste, it can be considered by the country that sends it as reuse, and by waste by the country that receives it, because there's no necessarily agreement. And these different national approaches can be very difficult to handle by the importers and the traders. But these governments are not standing back, and these regulators are providing solution, and we should build solution with them, not for them. So why did we do such a pilot? On its own, as a SMEP program supported pilot, it covers only 2 markets, right? It's not the whole sample. But this is only one layer of the whole solution that would be a powerful solution to this. The second layer is a way to see the whole trade, not 2,444, 5,500 garment, but the full 1.27 billion kilogram that move each year. And then layer 3 is cooperation with Basel, with the World Customs Organization, with custom services and standard body to ensure that it's real, reusable, valuable goods that are traded and that the waste are managed properly. No single layer is enough on its own, and together they begin to make evidence-based regulation possible. Now I want to present something that we find really cool. We've basically, to help with this issue, developed a monitor under the SMEP program that harmonizes UN trade data that lets us visualize trade as a system. It shows where the clothing flows and which of those flow run between developed and developing countries, north, south, south. It also shows concentration. So in Tanzania, the share of these imports coming from one partner rose from 26% to 56% in 5 years. So that means now you're more dependent on a single provider. That is reducing your resilience. And this does not show the trade is waste. It means the trade system is changing in ways policymakers should understand better and earlier. Who supplies the market, how dependent the market is on shrinking number of sources, and where more information may be needed on quality, sorting, and end-of-life management. This is the value and the limit of the trade data. HS code can track flows and concentration. They cannot show where reusable value ends and residual waste begin inside a bale. And that is the kind of shift of a country needs to see early. And it leads us to ask a more meaningful question. Is it waste? Namely, where should we look first instead of is it waste? Because the monitor does not tell us where the problems are, it tells us where to look first for where this problem might be. And there's no one thing trade data cannot yet show, the line between value and waste. So the Code of the World Trade on the HS Code 6309 tells us that used clothing has crossed the border. It does not tell us whether that clothing is grade A, repairable, usable, as a rag, recyclable, or final waste. This is where the monitor becomes handy. The monitor shows where the trade moves, which country and corridor are most active, where flows are concentrated, and regular changes may be needed. So help country ask better operational questions. Where are the high volume corridor? Where is the market becoming dependent on fewer routes? Where should new classification rule affect affordability, livelihood, or custom capacity? Where should field verification, standard cooperation, or pre-shipment inspection be prioritized? Instead of declaring from Geneva that it is waste, the monitor helps give countries an evidence system to now focus on where majority of problems are. We're coming to the end, sorry. As I finish my intervention, let me close where I begin. Where does used clothing become textile waste? We cannot answer that from trade data alone, and I would really worry if anyone did. But we are no longer starting from assumption. Field evidence show that inside what is inside these bales. The trade monitor show where to focus on our question and efforts, and standard and custom system can then operationalize distinction that matters. That is the evidence that the evidence chain that UNCTAD is helping to build. The report also gives us one clear lesson. The waste share is not fixed. It depends on sorting, recoverable value, and whether there are real pathways for reuse, rag, recycling, and disposing. Have we seen globally, after sorting, the residual unsellable share of credential clothing is estimated at 1 to 12%. In our pilot, it's 1%. So the regular question is, do we have the evidence system to tell value from waste before rules are applied? So finally, what are the opportunities here? UNCTAD's answer is to help build that system, field evidence, trade monitoring, development analysis, and cooperation to advance these issues. Basel brings the waste governance mandate, custom and standard body bring implementation, and UNCTAD brings the trade evidence that shows where regulation will land, who it will affect, and where verification should begin. The opportunities to connect these three systems so regulation can target major waste, strengthen circularity, and protect the reuse market that already keep value in circulation. So I want to just close here by thanking you and really looking for questions and debate on these issues.
Thank you very much, Chantaline, for the insightful presentation and for introducing us to this important monitoring tool. We will now move on to Matthias' presentation, but we may come back to you for questions afterwards.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it works. So thank you for having me here. I'm Mr. Matthias Gustafsson. I work as a senior researcher at IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. And we have just conducted a study and finalized that one on how the implications might be for the mitumba market from introduction of Basel Convention rules in the trade of second-hand textiles. And in order to do this, we have had kind of a series of studies. I'm showing here two of the earlier ones. So the one on the left This is quite environmental, I would say, with LCA and different things like that. And then we had on the right side from last year is about the value chain from Sweden to the traders in Kenya, in Nairobi. And now recently we have this in the middle there, which is the implication for Kenya, and the one I'm going to talk about. I've also been involved quite a lot in end of waste criteria in a project in Turkey. So, and that was quite interesting as well to understand the recycling and the trade there. And I think in a sense, the earlier presentation here really links to the question. It's easy to do categorize something as waste, but in a circular economy, you really want very quickly to try to recategorize it to a secondary raw material product. And this is kind of the tricky one in a circular economy. And I think as long as we keep the linear model, if you like, we never really have to deal with this. So we just go on and call it waste when it's waste. But in this circularity, you want to minimize the waste. You want it to become a secondary raw material or a secondary product. Prolong its life, because that's where you have the big environmental benefits. And I should also say that everything here goes hand in hand with eco-design, with proper final waste management when things actually reach its end of life and you can't recycle it, etc. So I just wanted to show this. This is the value of the imported products on the, we heard the trade codes, 6309, and also with the new codes, the 61 and 62 for Kenya, just to showcase a bit like how these go hand in hand. So the scope of this study was really about the textiles for reuse. So we also concentrated on the impacts in Kenya. So the impacts along the value chain in Europe, in Asia, and other places is not really the focus here. And how to do this? Well, basically, we used the consultation answers from December in 2025 to somehow form two scenarios. Actually, there are two lines of a narrative, you could say. One we call the waste control scenario, and another one is building circular economy scenario. And showcasing these two like parallel or side by side, the main concern for the waste control is about prevent dumping, prevent the transboundary of waste as a problem. So you have the prior and informed consent procedure. That's one of the instruments for this. We also see the synthetic fibers as one key element where you want to have restrictions. And role of the Basel would be like a central regulator in a sense. The building circular economy, on the other hand, it's built on the idea that you actually have a rather well-developed circular system on a global scale for prolonging life on reused textiles. And the prior and informed consent would not really fit for this because there would be like products. So you need to see these as products in a second life. Again, would come with similar analogy for synthetic fibers, that these clothes are actually considered new second life textiles. So the role of Basel here would be supporting governance framework mainly. So looking at some of the broad impacts on the market and trade, is one thing that we heard already here is that products are really well defined. And another thing that is kind of very clear, a quality of this trade is that it's quite quick. So you want to trade your things. You don't want to sit on a big stock. You go from buying, selling. You have seasonal variations. You know that if you put an order, it will take 20 to 30 days to get it. And that's really important to have the right stuff for the right season. So for the scenario one waste control, the prior and informed consent one of the key elements here is that it will cause delays and additional cost. And this will also have implication of cash flows, difficult to align with season and so on. So this is quite a strong negative impact. We also see trade cost for revision and so on as part of this. In the scenario 2, building circular economy, there will be some additional administrative costs because it comes with the territory, basically, that you need to keep track of what you're doing. Here you also have the trade code issue, but I think that one of the differences is that it's going to be inspired much more by the trade that you already have in place. A lot of these traders, these market players, are very well aware what they're buying in their bales. It doesn't come as a surprise what you have in your container. It's actually a very well-defined system already. Yeah, so looking at the social and economic side of this, which we also heard in the earlier presentation, is that it creates a lot of accessible jobs, income opportunities, and of course also puts affordable clothes on the market. With this waste control scenario, there is a big risk that the number of jobs in this sector will decrease due to the lower volumes, and also that it's going to be more tricky to enter these markets because you have to have maybe more cash, you have to have more knowledge about it, and so on. And another important thing is reduced accessibility for the affordable clothes due to the reduced volumes. So the building circular economy, it will continue being a job-creating sector, provide affordable clothes. Basically, the idea is to sort of support the existing trade, and the volumes wouldn't change that much due to this introduction. On the environment, the empirical evidence that we see in published literature shows that it's less than 2% of items in bales that are really waste. There are some, variations on how you describe and define the waste. But as long as you call it the final disposal, it's something like this. So the scenario 1 with the waste control, that expectations on reducing the textile waste shipped to Africa will not really be realized, because in this kind of data we have, we don't see that in this case there are so much. Synthetic fiber restrictions will, of course, demand for alternative products put on the market. In many cases, this would be low-cost new textiles. For the building circular economy, I would say that the main thing here is that you prolong the life of textiles. And as we know, and it's been shown, is that the associated environmental impacts of second life products is really very much lower than any new ones. But I want to iterate again, waste management, when things comes to end of life, when it's actually, it's a big challenge. But that would be for all products. So some concluding remarks. The existing trade is built on demand. It's really important to know that people pay a lot of money to import these containers to these countries. And the expectations and quality is well defined. And throughout the value chain, this is quality checked and so on. So the waste control scenario, it could definitely undermine the market for the second-hand clothes in Kenya with negative economic and social impacts. And also, there is difficult to find evidence that environmental benefits would be there. The building economic scenario would further strengthen the reuse of textiles and also add transparency to the trade. So thank you for your attention, and the QR code here is also a link to the place where you can find the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for bringing a concrete example of potential implications of these policy discussions. I would now like to move on to the panel and give the opportunity to panelists to introduce themselves and the perspective they bring to this discussion. So, shall we start with you, Marvin?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. As has been mentioned, my name is Marvin Owusu. I am an executive member of the Ghana Used Clothing Dealers Association, one of the main bodies that helps to govern the trade of second-hand clothing in Ghana. It primarily encompasses importers, retailers, and market traders. I have just about 5 minutes, and I don't have any slides, so for those who wanted to take photos, maybe you can take a picture of me. But aside that, I will try and run through as much as possible because we don't have much time. And I'll make just 5 key statements, some of which have actually been made in the submissions that have gone past. Point number 1, the second-hand clothing trade is a lifeline to millions. In Ghana, 2.5 million individuals are involved in the trade. Majority of them are women and the youth. 95% of people in the Ghanaian population buy second-hand clothing. It gives them access to quality, affordable clothing. Now, whilst this economic engine is taking place, we are actually supporting textile sustainability because we are extending the lifespan of clothes. Don't forget that there cannot be a textile circular economy without the reuse of garments. Point number 2, the process. Now, importers bring in second-hand clothing into the country. In Ghana, to be specific, about 80 containers come into the country on a weekly basis. But not all these 80 containers actually go into the Kantamanto market. As a matter of fact, containers happen in these ways. Some are actually redistributed to different regions in Ghana, while some are actually re-exported to neighboring countries. So Ghana more or less becomes part of a wider West African reuse network. Now, this matters because it is misleading to assume that all used textile imports entering Ghana come into the Kantamanto market, or that all goods are somewhat destined as waste in Ghana. Now, before these items are actually exported, they are sorted at the export side. They are sorted, they are graded, they go through quality control checks before they are baled into 45 to 55 kilogram bales. Now, some of these sorting, what they go through practical indicators such as wearability, quality, and product type, amongst others. So it comes to question the narrative sometimes of waste colonialism and waste dumping, because the import products that are actually coming through are actually bought. We pay taxes on them, and also the Ghanaian community depends on quality for them to for the business even to thrive. Ghanaians do not accept inferior goods, and it keeps on the toes both the exporters and importers to make sure that what is coming through the doors of Ghana is quality. Point number 3, waste dumping on beaches. Now, this has become a thorny issue in the Global South, and one of the reasons why we are having these discussions under the Basel Convention. I had a photo, I don't know whether it can be shown. Yes. We can take a look at this image that you have on there. I'm sure most of us may have seen similar images stating that textile waste or second-hand clothing textiles are dumping the beaches in Ghana. However, when you actually go to these beaches, what you actually see are polythene bags of different colors that in hindsight are being showcased as textiles. And it is very important for us to know this because it creates a better gives a better picture of the true levels of textile waste. I will not lie to you, when you go to these beaches, you actually have to do a treasure hunt to try and find these textiles. It is actually difficult trying to sift out these textiles. You can take the the QR code at your own time. There's a 30-minute documentary which buttresses and goes into detail in what I'm talking about. Also, research commissioned by the Ghana Used Clothing Dealers Association brought out the findings that textile waste as a composition of general waste in Ghana is 2%. Now, textile waste including second-hand clothing textiles, local manufacturing textiles, first-hand textiles. So if we were supposed to take just the used textiles, we are talking about 1% of the 900,000 tons of annual waste that are in Ghana. 1% being second-hand clothing textiles. Now, this is also similar to researches that has been done by the likes of the German Federation GIZ, which shows that second-hand clothing textile waste is under 5%. The likes of research has been done by Circle Economy Foundation, which also shows that textile waste is around 4%. And these numbers are in and around that. Point number 4, waste infrastructure systems. Now, Ghana generally has an issue with its waste management infrastructure. I know globally we are all trying to find better ways of managing our waste. Ghana is no exception. It is amplified in a country such as Ghana. What we need is support in innovation, investment in infrastructure, and better waste disposal methodologies. Infrastructure that would complement existing reuse and value recovery systems. I've run out of time, but I'll just touch on my 5th point, which has to do with traceability. Now, this is very important. Recently, there's a foundation in Ghana now called the Landfills to Landmark that have actually developed a pilot of a traceability tool. What this traceability tool is going to track clothing that has been imported from exporters to importers to retailers to market traders to map out the flow of textiles. What this will do is it will create better transparency, provide accurate data of real textile waste levels in the second-hand clothing ecosystem, and enhance proper disposal practices. Currently, it's at a governmental level being discussed with the Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Environment, Environmental Protection Agency, amongst other stakeholders. I would end here, and if there are any questions that you have for me in the Q&A session, I hope I'll be able to clarify certain things. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marvin, for bringing your expertise to this panel and for reminding us of the importance of adopting a critical eye when looking at pictures and data to ensure we understand where they were produced and the exact reality that they are attempting to capture. Now, I would like to turn to our online speaker, Iqbal. Let's see if we can see you on the screen. Just bear with us for a moment. All right. While we fix this technical issue, I would like to turn to you, Jessica, so you can give us an overview of your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Technical difficulties all around. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Franken, and I am the Vice President of Government and External Affairs for SMART. which is the Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles Association. We're a US-based trade association that represents companies across the textile reuse and recycling value chain. Our association's been around since 1932, but the industry is much older than that. And collectively, our members divert millions of tons of textiles each and every year, though we do know that that number needs to be increased, which hopefully is why we're all here. While SMART members do export to markets around the world, much of the North American textile trade is concentrated throughout the Western Hemisphere. So our members have decades of experience working throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. What many people don't know is that in the Americas, this isn't simply an export market. It is an integrated circular economy system. Clothing that's collected in the United States is often shipped as unsorted, credentialed material to sorting and grading operations in places like Chile, Honduras, and the Dominican Republic. From there, it's sorted, graded, and then distributed throughout the region based on market demand. Those sorting facilities, together with large retail operators in the region and thousands of small businesses throughout Central and South America, support local economies, create millions of jobs, and again, provide affordable clothing to millions of people. And I think it's really clear or important to be clear about something here. This is not viewed as a waste trade by the companies or the people that participate in it. In fact, our partners in receiving countries are deeply offended by that characterization. They know, because they participate in it, that it's a reuse and recovery system driven by real consumer demand for affordable clothing. At every single stage, these businesses are trying to find the best possible use for every item. If it can be worn again, it can be then sold for resale. If not, for reuse rather. If not, it may be repaired, repurposed, converted into industrial wiping cloth, or processed for fiber recovery and textile recycling. Disposal is always the last resort, never the objective. And the waste figures, as we've heard, really do reflect that. So for me, it's somewhat difficult to reconcile the fact that at the very same time that we have governments like the United States and the European Union and others who are investing enormous amount of human capital and financial resources in developing and expanding extended producer responsibility programs, or EPR, which are all focused on promoting textile collection and recovery, countries here are actually considering restrictions like pick controls that would undermine these very systems that are already delivering the outcomes that they say they're seeking. If the goal is truly circularity, then I feel that we should be strengthening these networks and not making them harder, if not impossible, to operate. And then to make matters worse, these restrictions will do nothing to solve the real problem, which again is overconsumption, fast fashion, and inadequate waste management infrastructure in certain locations. They will simply disrupt these circular systems, reduce access to affordable clothing, as we've heard, all while jeopardizing millions of livelihoods that depend on this sector. And guess who will benefit? Producers of new, fast fashion. And that's because if the affordable clothing is no longer available in these markets, then consumers there will have no choice but to shift to the cheap, flimsy, low-cost fabrics. And that will, of course, increase demand for virgin material and reinforce the very fast fashion model that we say that we're here to solve, that we want to address. So I think we've heard already that what we know needs to happen here. We do need better data. We've begun that process, but we're happy to gather more. We would like to have traceability, better traceability, modernized, harmonized system codes, stronger EPR programs, and greater investment in waste infrastructure and recycling and reuse systems. What we don't need to do here is disrupt the collection and sorting systems that are already keeping millions of tons of textiles out of landfill and can be built upon moving forward to expand that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for your contribution. I would like to check quickly if we are able to turn to Iqbal.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, now you can see me, I can see myself. So Thank you very much for inviting me. I will try to be precise and quick. From background, since 1994, I've been associated with textile industries, but with textiles for 18, 19 years, sometimes as long as 4.5 years, then into something else than textiles. But as late as March this year, I was still associated with textiles. So as a matter of record, I am a beneficiary of used textiles. The first job interview that I went for after my MBA, I bought a used shirt from a local used clothes market. It was from that catalog brand, The Land's End. So my association with that, you can say how deep it is in Pakistan's economy and society. Our Ghanaian friend just said about 95%. I won't say 95%, but in a population of 250 million, it's more than 65, 70. Even some middle class people, from the middle of the middle class, they are dependent upon used clothing. And I just want to make one very important point is that more so for winter clothing, we do depend on used clothing, because in Pakistan, there are not many winter clothing products are made. Whatever some are made, they're expensive, and we do depend to a very large extent, to a huge extent, for imported winter clothing. And for many people, it's just difference between going cold or difference between warmth and cold in winter. So this is extremely important. We have talked about clothing, but we haven't talked about home textiles, bed sheets, the pillowcases. That is also recycled in Pakistan. I'm sure at elsewhere also. So when we talk about imported recycled clothes, but much of the recycling, I believe, happens locally. It's handed down from one generation to another, from the owner of the household to the servants, and then it goes to the villages. It's very, very long time before you can finally say that this particular garment or piece of clothing or home textiles has come to its end of functional life. And Pakistan, I believe, is still the largest importer. I believe last time I checked, it was, in terms of tonnage and everything. So we are a big importer. We are a big exporter also, but we are also a very big user of these products. And we must realize that only there is this chemical aspect, the water consumption, the chemical aspect. Look at the time it takes for a garment from it was first constructed at the order of some European brand, and then finally it goes to Europe or the US, comes back, and then goes to a city, then to a town, and then to everything. That is finally kind of comes to its end as useful thing. And we also have to make a distinction between recycling, which is reuse, and then of course the ultimate recycling, when we just kind of shred it and then we chemically decompose it. That's a very long way off. I don't think much of it is going on. Much of it is going on in terms of final recycling. And as a matter of fact, it's my experience that if you go and buy recycled polyester in Pakistan, it's more expensive than virgin polyester. That tells you the economics of this whole thing. And then, of course, when we say that these clothes are sorted here in Pakistan or other importing countries, these clothes are, many of them, if not all, many of them are already sorted in Europe. So the choices of bits are retained there, and then I believe the rest of the thing, not all of it, but most of it or some of it, is then exported to Pakistan. And recycling, hands down, is much better than reusing. And recycling is much better than building something new. I'll just give you one example. Dyeing a garment, dyeing a fabric is much more sensitive, because sometimes it takes maybe 6-7% by weight of a chemical, then multiple washes. Recycling or reuse, there's not much dyeing of the garment that they have made, because it's going to destroy this whole thing. So just by missing out on this one step, one process, we save lots of stress on the environment, water usage, energy usage, and chemical usage. And just let me know when my time is up, because up till now, this is a concern. Up till now, it is a labor-intensive industry, recycling. But the way we are going, the way we here talk about in Europe and elsewhere, it is soon to become a capital-intensive industry, and then this whole kind of debate will start all over again. So when we get to the last part, where I have some recommendations, I'll kind of touch upon that also.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iqbal, for your contribution and for highlighting this aspect of accessibility to seasonal clothing, which is made possible through reuse. And we have attempted to cover a lot of ground. And originally, we wanted to dive deeper into policy recommendations from each of the panelists, but we've heard a lot of data We heard some policy recommendations around traceability, HS codes, clearer definitions. I would like to now turn to Teresia for some closing remarks in the hope that we can also open the floor to a brief Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Teresia Wairimu-Jenga, chairperson of the Mitumba Consortium Association of Kenya, and also the chairperson of the Pan-African Association of Used Clothes Traders. Mitumba is a Swahili word for second-hand clothing. I began in this business more than 20 years ago with about $25. Today, I represent over 2 million of Kenyans whose livelihood depends on this trade. And I speak for millions more across Africa who rely on it for affordability, clothing and income, and also business opportunity. This debate is more than textiles. It is about justice, dignity, and livelihood. Let us be clear. Second-hand clothing is not waste. It is opportunity, it is dignity, it is the green industry that has been well established for decades. For millions of traders, tailors, transporters, and young entrepreneurs, it is how livelihoods are built and sustained. This is how a single mother makes her living in the market across Africa. For millions of families, it is how people access affordable clothing. How will a father earning $2 be able to dignify his children if not through used clothes? In Gikomba Market, Kenya, and Kantamanto Market in Ghana, in Owino Market in Uganda, in market in Maputo, Mozambique, and many other African countries, we see this reality every day. These are not waste streams. They are vibrant circular economy systems where clothing is reused, repaired, resold, and recycled. So we must ask, how does a shirt worn with pride in Europe suddenly becomes waste when it arrives in Nairobi, Kenya? How does a jacket used in New York could become hazardous only when it is reused in Accra, Ghana, Kampala, or Dar es Salaam? This is not science, it is not justice, and it is not logic. Kenya collects at least $15,000 in taxes per container of second-hand clothing, amounting to around Kenya shillings 16 billion each year. That is not consistent with the claim that we are importing waste. We are business people importing goods, supporting families, and contributing to our economy. We support transparency, but we oppose classifying used clothes as hazardous waste. We oppose prior informed consent, PIC, procedures of requiring special consideration under the Basel Convention. Such measures would threaten millions of jobs, reduce access to affordable clothing, and harm economies across our continent. The evidence is clear. Only a small fraction of imported textile is non-reusable as clothing. The overwhelming majority is reused, repaired, resold, or recycled because this sector meets a real need. Why it is discussed that is harmful? Millions of us, we are real people. We are in real trade. We are not trading in waste. We are trading in good quality used clothes. If the international community is serious about reducing hazardous waste, then the answer lies upstream in better design. We understand there is need to address true waste. However, we must not allow misguided, poorly constructed environmental policy to become a vehicle for economic disempowerment. Africa should not be punished for practicing the circularity, the world now claims to champion. We do not ask for charity, we ask for fairness. We ask for partnership. We asked for our used clothing associations to be recognized as the champions of circular economy. It is time for the informal sector to make their voices heard and the freedom and also the freedom to prosper with dignity. Used textiles are not the problem. They are part of the solution, embodying the circular economy and with the real people supporting livelihoods across Africa. Used clothing business is not just a trade. It is a lifeline for millions of traders in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresia, for joining us. And we've run out of time, but I would like to first thank all our speakers for sharing their insights and expertise. And I would like to open the floor for a very brief Q&A. And first, let me turn to Jennifer to see if there's any question online that can get us started. No?
The only question is regarding, we will share out the information on the links and the reports and contact information.
Okay, then we can address the room and see if there's any question here. You can open your mic.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And just to put everything in context, you've talked about the proposal which is actually being discussed here. But could you also highlighten us on the process that's already working, the HS code, from my perspective, this is actually a trade issue. And how can it be actually refined from the trade angle so that, it doesn't look like, how can these aspects be tightened from the trade procedures, instruments, those verification, so that it's not perceived as dumping? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question. First, I would like to mention that there is code reform proposal made by Recycling Europe and the TRA and Cambridge University, which aims at reforming HS codes so that they reflect more accurately the reality of this trade. And happy to share that report with you afterwards offline for the sake of time. I don't know if anyone of the panelists would like to add anything on HS codes. All right, then any other questions?
Not. But if you have questions, please come in. But just on the HS code to say it does work. So we have a UN Global Seaweed Initiative, and what you need is governments to come together to submit their requests to the World Customs Organization. And for the seaweed, it's similar issues where you have very few species that have a specific HS code, and so it makes it hard to trade them. And so the step would be for governments, and you have representative at WCO, to submit a request, and ideally to have several other government that supports it. And then the technical organization can support you on that as well. But there's every so many years that the WCO does the extra HS code, and now there's a process to review them now. So it's not like a constant thing, but if we start now, then perhaps for the next phase, we could have a new HS code.
Thank you, Chantaline. Indeed, and there's the next deadline for submitting proposals is August 27, and I actually have printed copies of the report I was referring to with me. So by all means, come find me afterwards, and I'm happy to give you a copy of the executive summary of that report. Any other questions?
I think this is a question guided for Jessica. I think
Sorry.
we had a previous conversation. Huh?
There was also one question in the room.
Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you. I have more reflection than a question. And so thank you for our presentation. Were really detailed. And at first, I present myself. I'm from Ukraine Waste Management Department. And so, as we see on your presentation, Ukraine is also on this flows of the second hand, the imported used textile, and we have 1,000 tons of second hand every year. And in your presentation, you didn't touch such item. It's about reporting. Then we have BIR-3030, it's waste, and we imported second hand as waste, but then it became a good. So we rose this chain of generate, and then where it became, we have the generation of the waste in 2 points of this. Then it comes to our country, and then when it's sold to the citizen, and they use it again, and then it again the waste. So we have the big problem with the statistic data in Ukraine, because we can't say exactly how much we have waste textile, used textile, and this is really mess. So it's one question that have to be clarified, and to have strict criteria. Maybe it's proposal for discussion, maybe it's for searching the solution together. And also we agree that we have strict criteria, what is used textile and what is waste textile. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question or reflection that really resonates with what we've been covering. And now, Jennifer, you had another question online? Or any other questions in the room? Okay. Then I would like to thank you all so much for joining us. And once again, thank you to our speakers and our co-organizer, UNCTAD, for making this side event possible.